Good evening. It occurs to me that one of the great things that children seem to lose as they grow up is the right that many of us get as little people to be read to. And so it's a rich reward as adults to actually hear beautiful writing read to us. Maybe it's part of being an adult that we can be children sometimes. So I want to say a few things before we begin speaking. First of all, it's a pleasure to hear those remarkable Kweli authors and Edward's wonderful story. I want to give you one little anecdote. Saul Bellow was very close friends with Ralph Ellison, and they lived together in the Hudson Valley with their wives when they were writing novels in the 50s and teaching at Bard College. And one night, Bellow and Ellison and a third author named Georges Simenon, French writer who wrote hundreds of novels, were sitting together at Bard, and Simenon didn't know Ellison. And Simenon said to Ellison, "What do you do?" And Ellison said, "I'm a novelist." He said, "How many novels have you written?" And Ellison says, "Well, I've written one novel." And Simenon says, "Oh, one novel, you're not a novelist." That tells you altogether too much about too many things, but the main thing I would say is how wrong one can be. To be the author of one great novel is to have accomplished a great deal, and The Known World is just such a book. So we're sitting next to a remarkable story writer and novelist tonight in Edward P. Jones. I'd like to read a tiny bit from just one paragraph from that novel as we begin to talk. At the end of that book, there's a moment where the scene shifts from an imaginary county called Manchester to Philadelphia, where a number of slaves who've escaped from the larger story of the book arrive in a great room. And in this great room is an enormous and remarkable artwork. And one of the former residents of Manchester County writes back to her sister about this artwork, which has been produced by one of the characters in the novel, a woman named Alice, who is rumored to be and understood to be crazy. We see her in no moments in the book where she isn't doing something that people are very surprised by. So here's this grand piece of art that they come upon, and this is the words of a letter that is written back to a family member describing Alice's art. "A grand piece of art that is part tapestry, part painting, and part clay structure, all in one exquisite creation hanging silent and yet songful on the eastern wall. It is a kind of map of the life of the county of Manchester, Virginia, but a map is such a poor word for such a wondrous thing. It is a map of life, made with every kind of art man has ever thought to represent himself. There is nothing missing, not a cabin, not a barn, not a chicken, not a horse. Not a single person is missing. I suspect that if you were to count blades of grass, the number would be correct, as it was once when the creator of this work knew that world. What one emerges with from reading your work is a sense of the extraordinary variety and particularity of human beings. And you devote an enormous amount of time to knowing the individuals who pass through your world in your fictional universe. And I wonder about that specificity and how it's achieved, because you say you don't write from your life.
Well, I guess I always believed that this fiction thing is, because it's not true, that you have to tell as many lies as possible so that people will swallow it. So that's what you do. There's a table, it's just not a table, but it's a table that holds a candelabra and the Bible. You just try to be as detailed as possible, because in the end, of course, it's untrue, and so you have to have people believe it and take it and accept it.
You've said that before you can write a character, even a minor character in a short story who may be there for just a paragraph, you need to know almost everything about them.
I think I might back away from that. I don't know. I think perhaps it's a case where even if it's a minor character, and you give the character a paragraph or a page, but then if you're called upon, if the character page is just having breakfast. And that's it. If you're called upon, you should be able to say what the character will have for dinner, even though that's not in the story or in the novel. You should try to know as much as possible, even though it will never be in print.
Lately, you have been teaching writing to some younger people, undergraduates in Washington, D.C., where you live. And I wonder, you've said that when people ask you about process, you really have nothing to say, because it's such a mystery even to the writer.
Yeah, no, I can be on the bus, taking my groceries home from the supermarket, and all of a sudden something will just appear in the mind. It has nothing to do with the bus, it has nothing to do with the city, but the imagination has its own way of working away, and I just let it go. People, I'm always surprised at the fact that people, they read my work and they feel, they want to believe that it all happened once upon a time. It seems to me that we've gotten away from this notion that the imagination can do wondrous things. I suppose when they were teaching us that in school, that, you know, let the imagination die, I was absent. And I've been very blessed. I don't really want to use anything from my own life for the lives of people I know.
The propriety or the privileging of the imagination?
I think it's both. You know, there might come a day, if I'm still doing this, where I won't have an imagination anymore, and then I'll start stealing left and right.
You grew up in D.C. In your childhood, you lived, if I understand correctly, in 18 different apartments during your first 18 years. And you've remained a resident of D.C. You've watched it change a great deal in all that time. What roots you to this city most?
I lived in Arlington, Virginia, across the river from '83 to '04. When I got out of grad school and came back up to the area, I didn't have a car, didn't want a car, and the job I had was in Arlington, and I didn't want to commute every day across the river, so I got an apartment in Arlington. The problem with living in so many different places and growing up is that you can't go back to a particular neighborhood and remember the place when you were 5, when you were 10, when you were 15. We lived in places for generally about a year or so. My mother was a dishwasher in a restaurant and didn't really have enough money for us to get a solid place. And so whenever something bad would happen, in one place, I remember, basement place, whenever it rained, our apartment would flood. So we ended up moving a lot. And that means I don't really have any place that I can call home in Washington. There aren't any people that I know anymore in Washington, as a matter of fact. I'm the last of all of them, I suppose.
Your mother, Jeanette Satana Majors, she could neither read nor write in your childhood. Did she tell stories?
No, she talked mostly about growing up in the South. She was born in Virginia and raised in Virginia, North Carolina. And she had stories about her family, her grandmother, farming, things like that. But really, she was not a storyteller in the way of fictionalizing things. But she had a certain voice that was Southern and that was all her own. And I think that whenever I put down a sentence, I'm trying to recreate that kind of way she had of talking. It has a certain melody to it.
Your first story was published in 1976 in a magazine, in Essence, yes?
Mm-hmm.
That was your sister was a subscriber to a number of magazines, if I remember correctly.
Yes, yeah.
And you were reading stories in that magazine that you thought weren't so good.
Month after month, they had bad stories. I was about 2 sort of years out of college. I had a creative writing course when I was in college, and I suppose my work was just as bad as the undergraduates I'm teaching now. But reading that magazine, in essence, every month, I just said to myself one day, I can do better.